computer. All right, we are recording. So this is our monthly Zoom call, and we are very honored to have Mr. Phillip Brown on here. Hey, Phillip, how's it going?
Good, thank you. Glad that you invited me to discuss.
Absolutely, and this is called Ask the Appraiser. We could refer to it as Shoot the Appraiser. That's probably what he feels like is coming, but we're going to basically dive into some questions that I feel like probably come up for a lot of our realtor partners, and just ask Phillip to weigh in on kind of some of the answers. Before we get into this, I'm going to make one disclaimer, and I'm going to say this. Phillip's job when he goes out and does an appraisal is to appraise the property based on appraisal guideline standards, okay? And this market, maybe as much as any, sometimes people misinterpret that as saying, oh, well, that appraiser is saying this is exactly what this property's worth. And Phillip can weigh in on this in a minute, but no, the appraiser is appraising the property to appraisal guideline standards, okay? And so there's going to be times when there are 1, 2, maybe 5 buyers who are willing to pay, $400,000 for a house that just unfortunately at the end of the day, the house appraises for $370,000, okay? That's those buyers' prerogative. That doesn't mean an appraiser can go, well, that's what they want to pay, so I guess that's exactly what it's worth. It might technically be worth that to those 5 buyers, but that doesn't mean that it always meets appraisal standards. So anyway, the topics we're going to kind of dive into, and we're going to allow you guys to ask as many questions as you want as well. But the topics we're going to dive into are things that can help you understand, I think, when you're looking at a property, how an appraiser may look at those topics. So to get started, I want to tell you a little bit about Mr. Brown. He has been an appraiser since 2000, so quite a bit of time, 22 years. And I have worked with him for, as a matter of fact, I didn't mention this to you, Phillip, but we probably worked together back in 2001 to 2004. Because you worked at Ranch Appraisal Services, and I worked at a company that utilized them.
Oh,
so,
really?
Yeah, so we probably knew each other before we even realized. But Phillip is a super cool guy. He is somebody that I can pick up the phone and call and ask a question to, and I try not to abuse that privilege, but it is helpful from time to time to be able to just ask him a quick question. So with that said, Phillip, thank you for coming on. And is there anything do you want to weigh in on the disclaimer that I put out there? Is that accurate, what I said?
Oh, in some ways. I mean, if you have 5 buyers willing to pay X amount, I would hope I'd be fairly close. But in this market, I mean, I guess you are. I mean, in this market, sometimes I'm just questioning myself because trying to figure out what's outliers or what is the actual market. I mean, it's like one day it seems so high, and then virtually a week later, there's 6 other sales that support it fine. It's just an odd time,
Right.
A really odd time. Saw yesterday where the Summer Association of Realtors put out that the market was up, what was that, almost 34% since last year. I think you read that correctly. I mean, that's just, I think, they're saying, what, 525 on a median house. I mean, imagine if it went up 34% again this year. I mean, that would be astronomical. But like what I'm trying to say is, I mean, things are just left and right, upside down right now, and very confusing. But also what you're saying too about you reaching out to me and whatnot, it's kind of gotten crazy as far as, I guess with the Dodd-Frank and whatnot act, they kind of said, don't talk to the appraiser. I can't remember specifically, but more or less, if you're trying to persuade them into seeing things your way or whatnot, based on money or things. But that being said, I mean, I love for people to call me and pick my brain. I feel like that's such a learning process for everybody involved. This not talking to the appraiser or, I mean, I hear stories from realtors, other lenders, whatnot, Well, the appraiser won't even speak to me. They tell me that's how the report is, and this is the way it is. And I just don't feel like that's necessary. I mean, coming up in the appraisal business and whatnot, especially, I mean, in early times when I first started, I mean, you virtually got to order and it had customer thinks it's worth X amount.
Right.
And so it was kind of a clue of what was going on. And it didn't last too long, people doing that or whatnot. But that being said, I mean, you could kind of be like, oh, this lender has not got their facts straight or whatever, and there's just no way. So you'd pick up the phone, tell them, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter, whatnot. Or you'd be like, hey, maybe you should send this order somewhere else if you just didn't get the good feeling. But I mean, everything we're going into is blind these days. I mean, you've got the contract sometimes. Well, in sales, I mean, you have to have the contract, but refinances, which I guess most realtors, well, except for personal homes, I mean, really probably don't deal with that too much. But like I was just trying to say, and I tell you, I'm terrible about rambling on circles, so just draw me in if you need me to. But what I'm trying to say is feel free to pick up the phone and call me if you've ever got any questions or scratching brain. Or, I mean, if I'm having problems on an appraisal and comps aren't that great or maybe not seeing eye to eye, I mean, I reach out to people, the agent,
Right.
Whatever, and hey, what was your basis on this? And it's kind of crazy. I mean, sometimes I'll spend hours trying to get my ducks in a row, call the agent, and they're like, oh, well, yeah, they're fully aware that it's not going to appraise for the sales price, and they're willing to bring X amount don't worry about it. I mean, I've had that situation more times than it's kind of surprised me. But anyway,
Yeah.
well, I'm rambling on. What do we want to jump into?
All right. So the first question, and listen, if you want to ask a question, it's a small group, so just unmute.
Yeah,
feel free to ask, or if you want to put it in the chat, I'll ask for you. But the first question is, how does an appraiser take price per square foot into consideration when determining the value of a subject property? That's kind of a loaded question. So,
it is a loaded question because it's very confusing. And, I kind of like to talk to some more agents about this because, I get a lot from builders, price per square foot, because it's a little bit more exact. And I mean, they're kind of comparing apples to apples, I guess you could say. I mean,
yes.
They've built the same house 20 times and, kind of gone down, and so they kind of know what's expected. And price per square foot, it's a great starting point, especially when you've got a neighborhood that maybe has the exact same home that sold 4 or 5 times, and you can kind of see where it's going or where it's been, and get a good generalization of that. Like I say, it is a generalization. It's a good starting point. And I think back to price per square foot and classes I've taken over the years, and I don't really even remember having these conversations in appraisal classes. It's always with realtors and a lot of friends. I mean, they pick my brain about, why don't y'all look? I remember when I first started, I had a friend that was a builder, and he was talking to me about price per square foot and just didn't really understand the appraisal process and how can you determine anything without really looking at the price per square foot. And, kind of having this question earlier made me really think about it. So I guess you could look at price per square foot almost as like price per acre. I mean, you start looking at different variations of things. Well, let me just back up and go to price per square foot. But you start looking at a home and the condition and things like that, and that's when the price per square foot just starts varying so much. And especially now on acreage. I mean, used to years ago, I mean, you'd have these smaller houses, Bethpage, Castaic Springs, maybe a 1,200 square foot rancher. It didn't really matter if it was on an acre or 5 acres. It kind of sold the same price, really didn't vary. But now these 5-acre tracts are really favorable. So it skews things like that. But, back to the original question, I mean, we don't really look at price per square foot too much. And I think the real reason is because we're looking for homes, similar year built, similar square footage, similar condition, and trying to use those as comps. And I don't know how many are familiar with the appraisal grid, was what we call it. But I mean, it starts at the top, and then it's got the sales price and all that, and what it sold for, and extracts everything from the property. Goes to the style, the site size, things like that. So as an appraiser, we're taking value step by step down that line. So the price per square foot gets so skewed. And plus, we're looking at homes that probably sold for similar prices, similar square footage, similar condition. So what that boils down to is the price per square foot on all those homes are virtually the same anyway. Um, on the more difficult properties, I do kind of look at price per square foot. Um, Maybe homes that are somewhat contemporary, or the comparable data is not that great, but I kind of look at it a different way. I don't know if you've ever looked at the cost approach on an appraisal, but it's enough to confuse everybody. It's probably been my biggest complaints with the lenders, borrowers, whoever, because on the cost approach and appraisal, it extracts everything pretty much.
Right.
So so say you have got a 2,000 square foot home that in theory might be selling from the typical $250 a square foot on typical. Well, once you extract the land out, the driveway, the porches, everything, it may show 150 square foot on the cost approach of the appraisal. But what I'm trying to say is, on some of those difficult ones, I'll do the cost approach first with historical data I have in mind, and just kind of see where that lies, just to get a general idea. But when it boils down to it, I mean, it's the market opinion of value, meaning what most buyers will pay for it. So I
Right.
think that's probably why we don't look at the price per square foot as much as, say, a realtor would, and I'm not, I tell you, I feel for you realtors right now, even trying to price anything. I don't really know how y'all do that too. I mean, it's an interesting market.
Well, okay. So on that note, you mentioned that part of the reason you don't look at price per square foot as much is because you're really trying to determine what a buyer pays. So here's an analogy that I've always kind of given people to think about it. Okay, let's say you take a home that is say you're in a subdivision with similar style homes, but you've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house that's on the street, and then 3 doors down, you've got a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house. Now, the first house they looked at was 2,100 square feet. The second house they looked at was 2,000 square feet. But the room count is exactly the same, okay? But every room is slightly bigger than the other house. So technically, if that home we're selling for, and I'm just going to use 150, but $150 a square foot, technically that means that the house that's 2,100 square feet should sell for 15,000 more, right? Because you take 100 times 150, and that's $15,000. Here's why price per square foot really doesn't come into play, because buyers don't look at it that way. If you take the buyer into the $2,100 square foot house, and so you take them in the 2,100 square foot house, and I'm going to use easy math, but and the house is selling for $215,000, and then you take them down into the 2,000 square foot house, and that house is selling for $200,000, and you look at the buyer and you say, now, I know you want to go back to that first house and pay $215,000. They're going to go, I don't think so, boss. Like, this is the house. It's the same house. Why would I pay $15,000 more for a different house? You're like, no. It's more square footage. You're like, I literally just walked through this house. It's the exact same house. There's no difference. So that's one example, but that's why price per square foot really doesn't come into play, because buyers don't look at it the same way. Now, you can make the argument, well, what if it's a 5,000 square foot house and a 2,000 square foot house? My answer to that is the same buyer's not looking at both houses. Like that, you're in a totally different ballpark at that point. So, but anyway, I only bring that up. Yeah, I only bring that up because if you have a challenge with a low appraisal, the very first thing I normally get from a realtor is, well, but based on the price per square foot, this doesn't make sense. And then I have to explain, well, I get that it's on the appraisal. It would actually be better, in my opinion, if that whole field were taken off the appraisal, because Fannie Mae requires the appraiser to put that on there. But for the most part, I don't know that the appraiser's looking at it all that much. So, all right, next question. And again, let me see. We've had some come in, so I'm going to look at this real quick. when the appraiser is working for the lender, not a cash deal, I thought the appraiser is not allowed to talk to the buyer or seller agent on the appraisal guidelines. I was surprised that comps for property. So let's talk about that first one. When the appraiser is working for the lender, I thought the appraiser is not allowed to talk to the buyer or seller agent. I'm going to answer that, and then Philip can kind of color in some stuff. So the Frank Dodd Act was set up to prevent lenders from coercing an appraiser into a certain value, okay? And I was actually in the business during the time that, this was happening. And what was happening was lenders were, and I'm not going to say this was extremely widespread. I don't know if it was or wasn't. It doesn't matter, but I know this is what caused the act, that part of the act. Lenders were basically calling up appraisers going, well, hey, if you can't get to the value, I'm not going to send you any more business. Well, that doesn't allow the appraiser to give an unbiased opinion of the value of that property. And the problem with that is when buyers are purchasing properties that appraise for $400,000 and they're willing to pay $400,000, but in reality, the appraiser felt like it was worth closer to $350,000. It's one thing for the buyer to go into that transaction knowing that it appraised for $350,000 and still be willing to buy it for $400,000. It's another thing when they thought it was worth $400,000, and then down the road they, do some information on the house and they realize, like, oh, wait a minute, this would only appraise for $350,000. The buyer then feels like, well, wait a minute, I was kind of misled into this house. Okay, so it's not good for anybody for the appraiser to be coerced. So given that, what lenders are supposed to do is they're supposed to have a system in place that the appraiser that's being selected is not based on the lender's likability of that appraiser, coming in value-wise, but is more based on, there's criteria that lenders use. But specifically, they don't want loan officers talking to the appraiser prior to the appraisal coming back in, okay? Which is why I don't know who is appraising a house until the appraisal comes back in. Like, I won't get told that by my appraisal department. And I tell my realtor partners all the time, you're going to know before I do, because the appraiser is going to have to reach out to an agent. Now, as far as the appraiser talking to the agent, I would say, Philip, and I think most appraisers would agree with this, if they've got questions they need answered, of course they got to pick up the phone because they're trying to do the best job they can on the appraisal. Is that pretty fair, Philip?
Right, and there is such a gray area there, and I can't find the exact USPAP or which is our standards, which is a huge book, and exactly what it says right here. So trying not to misspeak because like it is such a gray area. That being said, I mean, it does go back to that coercion, and I think most people probably know, hey, when am I being helpful or when am I trying to sway? I'll have agents that leave comps and this and that, and and I'm always thankful and cordial and whatnot. Most of the time I don't even look at them sometimes till maybe I'm finished with a report or whatnot, just to see what they've got going on or whatnot. But every now and then you do have a property that's not the neighborhood property that you're having to find needles in haystacks sometimes. But I mean, any good appraiser is going to have the same information that you have and can find that data. But like I said, talking to the appraiser, you can definitely talk. And I mean, I've got some agents that, everybody's out of the house and this and that, which is helpful because, I mean, you're more focused on what you're doing. But what Craig said was pretty much spot on. I mean, it just all boils down to coercion and trying to, make your point or whatnot. But I really feel like it's kind of more the appraiser's role of kind of shutting that conversation down in
Sure.
some ways. I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, like when it comes to an appraisal, I mean, it's kind of odd because when it boils down to it, it's my opinion of value. Well,
Right.
if I'm going to go out there and research something, whether it be a car or something else, I mean, I'm going to get as many people's opinions as I possibly can to kind of get a general feel of what's going on or this or that. But on an appraisal, I mean, you're coming down to one person's opinion on that value. And the appraisal process is not an exact science. It's not, a math formula that we can plug a couple things into and I guess, going back to the price per square foot, well, like, if that was exact and that's what worked, I mean, I guess Zillow would be running the game, and there's
Right.
no other question. I mean, it's such a gray area, and I mean, you just have to walk that fine line of, hey, am I trying to be helpful or am I trying to sway? And I mean, it's just, I guess it's best to just be careful with what you say or where you're going. I mean, and I can remember doing a refinance not long ago, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you're the second appraiser that came out," and I was like, "Oh really?" He's like, "Yeah, the first one I was just kind of talking to the person, and I was like, so what do you think it's worth? X amount or whatever." And the appraiser pretty much told me that he had to cancel the assignment now, and because he tried to sway them. I mean,
Oh wow, that's extreme.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I'm kind of, you're, of course, I'm gonna be honest with you. The refinances are worse than anybody because they're very curious of what their home's worth, and they'll start talking. And this day and age, I mean, I'm sure the realtors are experiencing it too. I mean, sometimes these people in their subdivisions, I mean, they know more than I do because that's their subdivision and they've talked to every neighbor, and sometimes they're really helpful, to be honest with you. I mean, know of sales that maybe haven't been on the market, or I remember one lady it's like, I almost asked her if she needed a job. She was so thorough and knew so much. I mean, it's amazing what people know these days. But back to the original question, just walk that tightrope, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I got you. So now I'm going to give you a specific scenario that someone asked about. So let's say you're doing new construction. Let's say it's a subdivision that there have been ample sales in that subdivision of similar style properties. Okay, so that's the qualification. And let's say there's been, I don't know, 5 or 6 that have sold recently, same type home. Maybe it's the same builder, maybe it's not, but still similar homes that you otherwise, would have no problem comparing to. Is there any scenario where you'd say, well, I can't only use this subdivision, I have to go outside of the subdivision? Or you see what I'm saying? Is there a black and white rule on that, or is that really kind of case by case depending on the subdivision?
In some ways it's case by case. It boils down to how good the data is that you have. Now, that being said, on a new construction specifically, I mean, most lenders, and it's good practice also for the appraisal, they're going to want a sale from a competing builder.
Okay.
And in some such situations, a competing neighborhood, especially in condos and whatnot, that they really like to see, just to make sure that somebody hadn't gotten in there and kind of cooked it.
Gotcha. Okay.
At the outside, I mean, because let's just face it, the outside surrounding neighborhoods affects most neighborhoods when it boils down to it. But well, I'm getting lost.
Well, so basically,
especially right now, I mean, new construction prices are so skewed right now because, well, let's just face it. I mean, a lot of times the agents don't put in the best data on them. Right now, I mean, I'm really trying to figure out, hey, when was this new construction under contract? This is kind of off subject, but I feel like it's important because, I mean, new construction that went under contract a year ago, I mean, that may not be the best comp because, I mean, we're in a different market when that house was built. So new constructions right now, I mean, it's difficult to find the best comps. And, I'll go outside a neighborhood if I feel like it's necessary, and the value's there, just to further support. But,
yeah. Hey, that's a really good point. That's something I hadn't really thought about. But when you're looking at new construction and you're looking at comps that are new construction, there are builders that will tell you that they're losing money on houses that they got under contract, a lot of months ago, because the costs have gone up, but yet they can't go back to the buyer and renegotiate. As a matter of fact, There's actually there's been some situations that have come up, one local and one out of state, where the builder basically did everything in their power to kick that buyer out of that contract because they wanted to get it for a higher price. So now that doesn't have anything to do with the comps, but my point of saying that is his point is very, very true in that if you're looking at that new construction home that sold 2 months ago, you might take a gander at when did it go under contract, because that could possibly be a lower value that it ended up closing at than realistically what it should have. Another question that came in: how much do upgrades affect? Example, you've got higher end appliances in a house and ceiling height cabinets in a house. How much does that, how do you look at that, Philip? And you probably hate this question. How do you look at that, and how does that influence value, opinion of value?
Well, so the best scenario in situations like that as an appraiser, well, I'm going to hope the one next door that's just like it sold, the one on the other side just like it sold, and the one across the street just like it sold. So all those things are kind of moot points when it boils down to it. But back to the question, I mean, yes, those things matter. I mean, the condition, it used to be like square footage was the holy grail, but I kind of see that kind of changing some, especially as more people face retirement age. You see, people downsizing and willing to pay a huge amount just because that's where they want to be and that's what they want, and no continual maintenance, things like that. But those things do matter. It's kind of been interesting lately. With such low inventory, you'll see homes that need renovation sell for fairly close to some that have had renovations, just because the buyer needs something and that's all that's available. But you're never going to be able. I mean, going back to that grid and the way things are extracted, I mean, to find a dollar for dollar amount, it's always difficult. I mean, although I may have 3 or 4 comps in there, I might have 6 or 7 more in my file that I've kind of scoured over, and I might have found one, hey, here's the same exact house that sold for, in theory, $50,000 more than the one that had no updating. So I'm kind of generalizing, hey, that's probably around $50,000. And I'm going to look at other sales too and try to find out, what was the market reaction to these renovations? And that's where I'm going to draw the adjustment from. I mean, just because somebody goes in there and I mean, you see it so much, especially in these newer nicer neighborhoods, maybe like a Foxconn or Fairview or whatnot, where, people move in and they've got what to me is the most beautiful house ever, but they decide to renovate the kitchen or whatnot. I mean,
right.
Totally got it. I mean, so situations like that, you may not see much, depending, but, in a traditional home, you try to find that value, and it's not very consistent. Sometimes it's not the best, but sometimes it's all you have. But, they do matter, but dollar for dollar, it's always hard to say.
Yeah, and here I want you to think of it another way as well, just, as kind of a practical matter. Philip has the right to go into the subject property and inspect it for the most part as much as he needs to complete his report, because you've got a seller that wants Philip to complete his report. And of course, you've got buyers and realtors that, want him to finish his report as well. Because look, at the end of the day, everybody wants to close, right? So for the subject property, everyone is willing for him to have all the information he needs, okay? When he goes and researches comps, he doesn't necessarily have that same prerogative, right? Like if somebody were appraising a house in my subdivision and an appraiser knocked on my door and said, hey, I'd like to walk through your house because, and let's just say that I just bought my house, 5 or 6 months ago. I'd like to walk through your house and really kind of inspect your house to see what your house was like, because I'm comparing it to another home. I might be willing to do that because I'm in the business, but an appraiser's not going to do that, because most people are you insane? No, you're not walking through my house. So he has to rely on what's on MLS. He has to rely on what he can see. and it's hard for him to always know that. Is that pretty fair, Phillip?
Well, that's fair, but I tell you what, these photos, except for the, I guess these wide angle lenses kind of make you a little, make you question some things sometimes. But, I mean, a lot of times, I mean, these days I've got a video to watch. I've got interior photos.
Okay,
It makes
that's a
it a
good
lot
point.
better on comps, as opposed to used to. I mean, you were just virtually guessing. I mean, you would try to call. I mean, it's just, it's so difficult to get a hold of anybody. And talking about going to, I mean, I would never knock on anybody's door because, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. I mean, I've been in situations just slowing down to take photos of people's houses that have sold us comps or whatnot, just getting a comp photo for it. I mean, I've been in some pretty sticky situations because people are just territorial, and I guess,
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I mean, I've got the home office, and somebody drives slow by my house. I guess I'm kind of peeking up the blinds too, wondering what that person's doing. Of course, me, I'm one that turns around, goes back again, and blah blah blah. So it's I've had a few guns pulled, and it's amazing how people calling me. Let's see your license plate and have your phone number before you can even be at the end of the street. It's crazy. But
Yeah. All right. I'm going to hit you with one more, and then we're going to shut it down because I don't want to take up everyone's time. But I think this next question is something that is important for our realtor partners to understand on the front end when they're helping buyers or sellers. And that is this. How do you calculate substandard or subprime square footage in a finished basement or enclosed garage? And that's the other one that I think, Philip's going to go, oh my gosh, I hate when this comes up because it's a hard one, right? So how do you deal with basement square footage, Philip?
well, and that's I feel like this day and age, you could probably throw accessory units on those too.
Yeah.
That's something that's kind of coming up that's getting more popular. That's even more difficult than the garage or the basement. It goes back to let's just hope I can find some comps that are similar. But let's just face it. I mean, it costs so much to put a basement in unless you have the appropriate lot, appropriate soil. I mean, you start going for a basement, all of a sudden hit rock, and next thing you know, the price is doubled or this or that. People decide just not to do it. That being said, I mean, basements have become more and more popular in our area, along with accessory units. A lot of things. I think the basements, for one, we've been so unfortunate to have so many bad storms. Two, I mean, home offices, and another big thing we're seeing is just people moving their in-laws in just because elder care is so much. For those reasons, they've become more and more popular. Basement square footage, though, it is so tricky. The worst scenarios I have on it is when you take a neighborhood, especially a newer neighborhood, that may only have one or two basement homes. For whatever reason, the person was willing to pay that extra to do it, or the lot just was right, or this or that. I mean, it's kind of like the other scenario. My ideal situation is I'll find, 4 or 5 comps just like it. I mean, and there's areas where you do. It's kind of funny. I was researching a little bit just to kind of see what other people thought, and it's like I think the general thing I got from just research on the internet was like it was 50% of the value of the upper floor, which I thought that was relatively low. But so you start looking at basements, and on the appraisal process too. I mean, I might do an appraisal, send it in to the lender. Well, they might have somebody from, Nebraska reviewing this report, and they see basement. Well, their basement is virtually almost a holding pond somewhere they go during storms. I mean, whereas basements here, especially on the lake, I mean, sometimes you'll get a basement house on the lake that, the basement's a lot nicer than the upper floor because that's where they spend most of their time because they can walk right out to the pool or to the lake or whatnot. But, you're always gonna, these appraisals always go through underwriting and they pick them to death. So the appraiser is always sitting there thinking, okay, I've got to do it, but I've got to stay to these standards and kind of make sure, everything's in the up and up. They always want to see an adjustment smaller than the upper floor. So when you extract your price per square foot that you're adjusting, they're going to want to see something smaller than that. And most appraisers are always going to adhere to that. When I cannot find a good basement sale to make things easy and this and that, I will look into other neighborhoods. I will take I will add the square footage together in my head and search it that way just to see. Say the house in the the 1,500 square foot with a 1,000 square foot basement. Well, I want to see what other 2,500 square foot homes are selling for in the neighborhood just to make sure it's kind of going in line and this and that. Um, it's always basements and converted garages too. I mean, those are even more difficult because a lot of times you don't know. Whereas the basement, I mean, most agents are going to separate them. They're separated on the appraisal. But when it comes to converted garages, I mean, a lot of people don't disclose that. I mean, you kind of can tell from the photos sometimes, or just the
Right.
style house. You can look on the tax card, and a lot of times, you can tell, oh, that used to be a garage or whatnot. But uh, I don't really feel like I've answered this question too
Well,
great because
hang on. Here's how I want you to think about it. And if I say anything that's wrong, Philip, you go, no, that's not exactly right. But so if Philip can find comps with basements that, and listen, when we say substandard, I'm gonna put a qualification to that to say it's not of the same standard as the above, the above grade square footage. Okay, and I'm at the office today, but my house, my personal home, I work from my basement a lot. Okay, and technically, I don't even think I can consider my basement square footage square footage. I don't really care. I needed a place to work because our family grew. So, but I would never in a million years, even if I could count it, expect that a buyer would go into my basement where I work and go, well, this is just as nice as the living room upstairs, because it's not. It's not the same thing. So if Philip can find comps with other homes that have quote unquote substandard basements, then it's easy for him because he can, and let's just say he finds a comp with the exact same square footage and the homes are very similar. He already knows what the market's willing to pay for that because someone paid whatever they paid for that house. What makes it difficult is if he's having trouble finding another comp that's similar to this house, and now he's having to make a determination of what a buyer or the market, so to speak, would pay for that quote unquote substandard, basement area. And it's funny you say 50% because I've heard that a lot. And I do tell realtors when they ask, like, hey, that's not a hard and fast, but it's probably a good place to be telling your sellers that might be it might be where that square footage lands, because I don't know that appraisers are going to get up to 100%, right, in that scenario.
all right, yeah, but but from market value sometimes, I mean, that's what it shows, like especially on the lake. I mean, it's like I said, it's
Well,
there's no
here's the difference though. Here's the difference though. When it's not substandard, like there's homes in
right.
Fairview that
Yeah,
you go in the basement. It's just as nice as upstairs.
oh yeah,
I
I
think
mean, the
I think that's a
open
little different
quarter.
deal.
Yeah. Well, and that being said too, you were pretty much spot on what you were saying, but that's another equation that gets thrown into it is that a basement can be so many different things to buyers. I
Right.
mean, what they want as far, you go into some basements, yeah, some you go in and yeah, they're finished, but I wouldn't really want my dog to stay down there. I mean, it's just not a good situation. And you go into other basements that, I mean, especially I see it a lot with people that have teenagers. I mean, it's a totally unfinished basement, but it's set up like the media room of all media rooms, and kids are riding bikes around and things like that.
Right. Right.
What I'm just trying to say is there's such different things to different, and the next person may want a fully finished basement for their parents or whatnot. So many different things with so many different people that it's always hard to really tell you uh, what the value is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that one's tough. And you know what? I spaced a minute ago. I lied. For some reason, I think we started at 9. So I'm going to ask you a couple more if you don't mind.
Oh, you're fine.
Because one of them that came in, I thought was really good, and I don't know the answer to this. So I'm curious. If a house was taken down to the studs and all the mechanicals are new, can it be comped with new construction or not?
Oh, it can definitely be comped with it. Again, I mean, I hate to. It's kind of like an appraiser professor that teaches a lot of class in Nashville. It seems like everything he talks about and everything else, it's always it depends. And kind of a good scenario because nothing's ever consistent, especially in the appraisal process. I mean, it's so frustrating. You go out to a property, say you appraised it 2 years ago, and the market was great in that neighborhood, and you had all these comps, and it was exact on. And then you go back 2 years later, and everything's changed. It's always changed, is what I'm trying to say. But back to your original question, house that's been knocked down to the studs, and depending on the quality and what they've done, I mean, you can definitely, I mean, my ideal situation is I would probably find a new construction. I'd love to find one that was similar, that had been renovated, which doesn't always happen. But I tell you, here in Sumner County especially, I mean, a lot of times I'll do those appraisals for banks or whatnot before they get started. They'll do it subject to or whatever, so I kind of know what's going on. But so I know. But like, you get on the tax card of some of these now, and they're showing that it was built whenever the renovation was.
Right.
So a lot of times people aren't knowing. Of course, I mean, if you're just using the foundation and this and that, I mean, in some ways it's virtually, but it's kind of unfortunate because like, you still have to wonder about the septic system. Did they replace the lines and things like that, water lines? There's probably going to be an adjustment against that new construction, just because, I mean, as a buyer, I think most people would probably rather have that new construction.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, what they're doing in some of these areas on these existing homes, it's just neat. I mean, the quality of the workmanship and whatnot it can be pretty special. So sometimes you see, the same dollar for dollar new construction versus this renovation, sometimes not more, because it's just unique and that's what the buyer wants.
So, and when he says adjustment against the new construction, he's basically saying, and I've been trying since we've been on this call to find a sample appraisal. I had one and I literally can't find it on my desktop. But he's basically saying, hey, the new construction home, so, and I'm paraphrased, but 200 sold for 200,000. He's going to take it a little bit off to account for the fact that, hey, the same buyer is not going to pay the exact same price for that renovated home that they probably would pay for the new construction. But it's not unreasonable with a take it down to the studs home. It's not unreasonable to use a new construction home as a comp. That's basically what you're saying, right?
Yeah, it's in situations like that, especially when it's a nice renovation, I'm gonna try to find as many comps as I possibly can, just to cover every basis. I mean, and I'm not, because we always like to try to bracket everything, as far as square footage, year built, site size. The more you can have something that's a little bit nicer and something that's maybe not as nice in the appraisal, highs and lows, the better. So I try to find as many comps as possibly can. That includes new construction. That's great. But kind of off subject with that, I mean, and back to the, when was this new construction under contract and this and that? I mean, you're seeing sales of homes that are 3, 4, 5 years old selling for more than the new construction in the neighborhood right now. And I think it's just more towards inventory, and these people can move in, next week, as opposed to waiting 9 months for a house to be built. And that's just not something you usually see in the market. It's been kind of interesting to have all these existing homes selling for more than the price of this new construction. It's just been kind of obscure to me, because that's not something that we've been used to.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, that's an exact example of the market dictating, what buyers' activity. No, that's a really, really good point. Another question that came in that I think is a really good question, and that is, when you're looking at a comp, and I don't know, I mean, you can kind of weigh in on this, like how easy or difficult is it to find quote unquote off-market sales? But let's just say that you've got a sale that is off-market. First question, can you use it as a comp? And second question, do you make any adjustments just simply for the fact that it's quote unquote off-market? Does that make sense?
It does, and it seems like this day and age, the MLS is so much better than it used to be. it seems like a lot of off-market sales make it to the MLS somehow or another, and they'll put for comp purposes only or this or that.
Right.
If I'm having a really tough time, I'll sometimes I'll use an off-market sale, especially if I know something about it. The problem is trying to figure out what was going on with it, having information. You pick up the phone and call people, and I mean, even when I'm trying to schedule appointments these days, it's like leave 2 voicemails and a couple of texts, and you're finally getting in touch with the people or whatnot. It's just everything's a process, so you want to have the best information you can possibly have. Sometimes I'll throw those sales in there, and I don't give them as much weight, and probably don't adjust it as much, just for the simple fact there's too many unknowns, and I'll note that in the appraisal. Hey, this was off market sale. Not much information was known or whatnot, but it did sell for that. Let's just face it. I mean, it's more difficult to find the off market sales because a lot of times the information doesn't catch up as quick. So a lot of times by the time you figure it out or whatnot, it's already an older sale or whatnot.
Right.
So that kind of use a lot of them, and nobody ever brings up an off market sale unless it just sold for astronomical price. It seems like,
Right.
you know what I mean. So you're always going to be weary because you do have those outliers, and that's what's been difficult in this market, especially. It's like trying to figure out if it's an outlier, somebody just wanted that house, or they sold it to their parents that are moving, that moved in from state next door and wanted it or whatnot. It's always difficult to figure out, is this just something that somebody wanted and paid too much for? And of course, looking over the past couple of years, I feel like I've probably stuck my foot in my mouth a couple of times thinking that, because the market has just grown and grown and grown when I'm sitting there trying to, I go back and one of the downfalls of the appraisal process is you're looking at historical data so much.
Right.
And I think we touched on that. Especially now. I'm looking at pending sales. Sometimes even on appraisal, I'll put 2 pending sales in just to show, because maybe the comps that sold in the last 6 months or even the last 3 months right now, maybe they're not the best comps, but you've got quite a few pendings in there, and that have been listed for more and more in line with what yours is doing. So I feel like that's where the market is right now, but these sales haven't sold or whatnot. I had one the other day. It was a situation where it sold for $10,000 over asking price. I looked at the comps. I thought, well, yeah, it seems like it's generally headed in this direction. There's quite a few pending sales that are indicating it. Well, by the time that I got to the property and started to write up the appraisal, all those sales had closed. And it wound up appraising just fine because all these other sales had also sold for well above, the asking price, which, right now it doesn't seem as scary. But God, when it first started happening, I think everybody was just not really knowing what to do. And it's just, it's been a difficult process.
Yeah. No, that is absolutely true. One of the questions came in is, do you work Davidson County as well? And he does. So he'll go to Davidson.
Yeah, I don't go as much as I used to.
I'm sure you roll your eyes when you get those orders sometimes, but Davidson's tough to appraise right now.
Yeah, it's always been tough to appraise, and what kind of course, going to East Nashville. I'm gonna be real honest. I'm pretty straightforward. There's been 3 or 4 times I thought, this is the peak. This is it. Like, it can't get any higher over here. And
Right.
It just continues to grow. And I'm talking, past 20 years. Because going over there 20 years ago was a lot different than going over there today. And back to those renovations, I feel like East Nashville, kind of opened the whole Middle Tennessee up to what can be done. But so Sumner County it's been so busy up here. That I've tried to stay up here and hit the surrounding counties the best I can, and not really dip into Davidson County. And because you run into a lot of issues. On appraisal, we're looking at a lot of highest and best use, and I saw some horror stories in Davidson County of people, selling these ranch homes on this acre lot. And they didn't realize what they had.
Right.
And that kind of made me gun shy a little bit. So I'm kind of protective of what I do in Davidson County, especially when it comes to highest and best use. So if I'm kind of got a lot of questions, I might turn that one down. But all in all, Davidson County has always been easier to appraise traditionally over the years because there's just more sales.
Yeah.
What happens when you get into these rural areas, especially Macon, Trousdale, um, and even northern Sumner County sometimes, you might have 4 sales and none of them are really that great. And you're trying to, dictate something from that makes it more difficult.
Yeah. No, that's.
Oh, sorry, Craig.
No, you're fine. What's up?
Yeah, so I'm just trying to, so the biggest concern that I have, the biggest disservice that I could have to a client is to have a lag time, right? To have my mindset to be lagging behind what the market's actually doing. And so as things start to cool, I mean, we're seeing, I was looking at numbers just the last couple of months. It's about, inventory days on market is about double in just about every category. And so as things start to slow and you're seeing these price reductions and everything like that, I'm trying to not necessarily take a lot of those into consideration when I'm comping or giving numbers and listing appointments and things of that nature. So is there something on a granular level that could help me or others watching this, that as I'm starting to shift that mindset, are there things that I should, because here's an example. If I'm pulling one that's 300,000 now, I think, okay, it's 300, 310 ish. You've got some that were 6 months ago, which is within that range, that went for 325, but you've got others that are 315 right now that have been on the market for 18 days and seemingly no activity, all in the same area. And so it's really hard to provide those numbers in a listing appointment and being candid and upfront, not to set expectations that are unrealistic, but also trying to balance what you'll see. Is there anything that you could do to weigh in on that to keep my mindset with kind of current with the market, so I'm not lagging behind or anybody else?
Great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And everything is so loaded right now. It's just, you look at all this data and just think if we would have realized 3 years ago, it's kind of the same. I think you're 100% correct on things seem to be cooling, especially with the interest rate. The inventory's up, days on the market are up. It seems to be we're headed to more of a correction. Now, that being said, it still could be a really good market. What I was saying earlier about what was it, 35% increase year to date or whatever. I don't see that happening again. But, even if it's 10, 15%, that's still fairly good. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, hey, hang on. I'm going to correct that. That is extremely good. It doesn't feel as good because of where we've been, but
right.
that is extremely good. So anyway, but
well, and so I really don't have an answer for your question. Because we just don't really know. If that says anything,
that's seemingly what I've been saying. That's kind of been my answer, and I feel.
Well, look at the past 3 years. From what all we've been through, if it was a movie we were watching, we probably would have turned it off, within the first 30 minutes because we're like, this isn't realistic. Seeing what the economy's done and how things have changed. Virtually when this whole COVID thing started, I was making my to-do list of what I'm going to do around the house and get improved and this and that, because I thought, I was going to be dead in the water. Next thing you know, I'm working more than I probably have in a while. As far as it was just bonkers. And to me, some of that was probably manipulated and this and that, and I don't know if it was good or it was bad, but
right.
I feel like things are going to cool down, but we're still have an influx of people moving in here. I think as long as people want to get away from whatever they're getting away from and no corrections made where they're coming from, we're still going to be in a good market where we are. Is it going to be, are you going to be able to buy the house today and then resell it in 3 months and make some of the money that people have been making? Probably not. But, it comes down to your buyers too. It's kind of like throughout this whole process of this escalating market and whatnot, it's probably been really smart for some buyers in the situations they're in to go and buy, but to others, probably not. And it's such a game. And I was listening to something the other day. I don't know. I really don't. I hear about all these hedge funds and buying up, the under $500,000. Are you seeing that much around here, Craig? I don't.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Are
No,
you really?
it's a real thing.
Yeah.
You and I may not, be talking to them on a daily basis because they're not needing
Yeah.
mortgages and probably not calling for an appraisal,
Right.
but they're there.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, and I know it's happening a lot in other markets and whatnot, and probably more in Davidson County, which, like I said, I hadn't been hitting as much. But it's going to be an interesting scenario down the road when those under $500,000 houses just aren't available. But then again, if things don't go well, there may be an influx of them if they start unloading them. But it kind of reminds me of when they started trading, barrels of oil. We saw how that happened. So I imagine it's going to be the same with the real estate. So.
Well, and so Caleb, to that point, next month we're going to be talking about, is there a housing crash coming? And I'll let you in on the answer, and the answer is no.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah, and there's a real reason why. But when you're talking to your sellers right now, I do think it's appropriate to be using, I guess, wording more along the lines of, hey, there is a softening in the market. So yeah, your buddy, thought their house was worth $300,000 a year ago, and it sold for $350. And I'm just using that example, but $340. Don't expect that going forward, right? And make sure that your seller understands that doesn't mean home prices have decreased. That means they're not increasing as much
at the same rate. Exactly.
Yes. And there's a huge difference between those. And I think people are going to get that confused over the next 12 months.
They're already getting it confused.
Yes.
Because they think all of a sudden it's a fire sale coming in the next couple of weeks, and it's like, wait a minute, and again, but that's been the whole self-fulfilling prophecy from the beginning. How many? That's to Philip's point, I believe that there's this backlog of tens of thousands of buyers, not just in our market, but Texas and Florida, some of these other hot markets that have just simply put it on hold or given up, waiting for this moment. And so that could further push it for 6 months to a year as they all start to hear the word on the street is the market is softening. Now it's my chance. Well, how much does that artificially increase it as they come out from underneath the, hiding and then get in the market, along with those that are continuing to come here. And our market's a little bit unique too. Our market has not been hit like the other markets. And so all those things, I agree with everything that y'all are both saying. My biggest thing is I'm really trying to challenge my own thinking, because it's very easy for me to slip where we were a month and a half ago. It's very easy for me to be there, and we're not there. And so I'm trying to further reinforce, I guess, for myself that we're not there yet. And how do I convey that to set expectations? That's my biggest fear, is that I go in and I undershoot. They pay me to maximize their return, and I undershoot that because I'm in the wrong mindset, or I just do them a disservice, and then I create issues throughout the deal. That's the biggest concern that I have.
Yeah.
Well,
no, that's fair.
You kind of need to, in my opinion, it's other people's too, but so much of this market that's being pushed right now the rental prices, especially the lower priced houses. These people are paying such astronomical prices on rent that I feel like it's really pushed some of that market.
Yes.
I don't think they really care what they're paying for the house, which, to be honest with you, I first started appraising. I was listening to an investor from California, and he was talking about, don't worry about what your house payment is. What you're virtually doing is offsetting rent later on. So eventually the rent will catch up and you're fine. So don't worry about it. And to me, that was just so foreign. It made no sense until we hit this market here, what we're dealing with in Middle Tennessee. And then now it makes total sense. But what I'm trying to say is, I think once you see those rental prices coming down and more availability in the rental market, that's probably when you're going to see some dictation in the real estate market, because people are going to have other options. And to me, I feel like, the 2008, 9, 10, whatever it was, when the market took a dive, I think that's a lot of people, they saw the opportunity. Hey, my house payment's $1,000, but I can rent this place for $600. I have no money in this house. I'm leaving. You know, it makes
Well,
sense.
but I will say this though, just keep something in mind, that I don't know that there's a ton of people that have nothing invested in the house, and the hedge funds that are buying homes, they're not doing it to rent control, right? So, I do feel like home ownership is going to be a challenge for many of
Yeah,
them.
I think so. Well, and that's one good thing right now is, I mean, the contracts I see and this and that and what's coming through. I mean, a lot of people are putting money in their home
Yes,
as a down payment. So I
yeah,
feel like that's very favorable.
no
Yeah,
question.
as opposed to 2010,
A
whereas I
hun-
mean,
yes,
people were virtually getting paid to move in the home. So
100%, yes, and that's what we're going to talk about on the next Zoom is how that relates to me saying there's not going to be a crash, because there's a world of difference between this market and 2008, 2009. And look, I might be wrong, but when you see some of the numbers that we're going to talk about, you know, as far as household formations, as far as, you know, and people don't think about this, but 100,000 homes a year on average just go away, like literally go away, because, you know, they're depleted. They can't be used. And so that influences, you know, supply and demand. But specifically to your point, and it is a challenge, Caleb, you don't want to undersell your sellers, but you want to give realistic expectations. You don't want them thinking that they're going to be walking away with $500,000 when in reality, that's not the contract that's most likely going to be coming through. And so I think just making sure they understand that it is a softening market. I do think that's probably a good idea right now for them to start to get their heads around. But I mean, good luck, man, because they're not going to see that. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not going to be their perception going into that conversation. You know. So awesome. Philip, thank you for taking the time. I really, really appreciate it.
well, I appreciate y'all listening to me ramble because that's about what I wind up doing sometimes. My brain
No,
starts to sometimes. So.
no, I appreciate it. So thank you to everybody thanks Caleb for participating. And like I said, next month we're going to go over some housing numbers and just some information to help you with your clients as you're talking to clients, and hopefully make some home buyers feel comfortable that you know, their investment that they're buying into is still truly an investment. And so anyway, I appreciate everybody, and y'all have a great day.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all. Thanks,
All
Philip.
right. Bye.
Thank y'all. Thank you. Appreciate it.